Figure 13.3 shows the evolution of fisheries as they develop. So as we move along the x-axis from left to right, we go from a fishery that is unexploited to one which is overexploited, then collapsed, and finally in a phase of recovery. And as we look up the y-axis, we see these different categories. So what's happening with profits, catches, the number of fishers or vessels in the fishery, and fish abundance. So when a fishery is unexploited, fish abundance and biomass is at the highest level, which is what we see. There's no fishing, there are no catches, there are no vessels, and clearly there are no profits. Then the fishery starts to develop. So somebody has discovered a market for a particular species, they start to exploit the species, and an inevitable consequence of the commencement of exploitation is that fish abundance or biomass will start to decrease. This is unavoidable and a consequence of exploitation. The number of vessels will gradually increase. Catches accordingly will also increase as more and more is landed. And profits at this point in time will also increase, probably as markets start to develop and the fishery becomes more sophisticated. Then we enter a phase of fully exploited fishery. And here we can see that profits reach their peak but then start gradually to tail off. Catches are still increasing, as are the number of fishers and vessels, but we see that there has been a considerable reduction in fish abundance or biomass by the time we get to the end of this period. We then get to a state potentially of an overexploited fishery, assuming that management measures have not intervened before this particular occurrence happens. And what happens then is that fish abundance and biomass is driven down even further to very low levels, perhaps less than 10% of their original value. The number of vessels may still be increasing because there may still be markets for these fish, and with fewer fish available, the price may increase, compensating fishers for a reduction in their catches. We see that catches are declining, and we see that profits decline where they're getting towards the break-even point. Then we enter a phase, if there is no management, of fishery collapse. And here we see that profits eventually go negative. Now these can sometimes be artificially buoyed up by subsidies from governments. Catches have bottomed out, fish abundance and biomass is at a minimum, and fishers start to leave the fishery. So we see a precipitous decline in the number of vessels prosecuting this species. With management intervention, finally we go into what's termed fisheries recovery, where basically the stock is in a rebuilding program. Hopefully, if our management intervention works and if there has been a severe reduction in fishing effort, we will start to see the biomass and abundance of fish increase, eventually maybe reaching a point where the fishery can recommence and fishers can come back into the fishery. Sadly, this pattern has been repeated many times over around the world, but in other cases we are starting to learn the lessons of the past and avoiding these mistakes in present times.